It was one of those jobs you take when you're running low on options and even lower on money. I found the listing online, night shift attendant needed for a gas station out on Highway 191 in Arizona. Remote location, quiet work, decent pay. It didn't say much else. I figured it was one of those old places, forgotten by time and technology, still clinging to life with a couple of fuel pumps and dusty shelves of outdated snacks. That didn't bother me. In fact, I welcomed the solitude. After everything I'd been through recently, the idea of being out there alone, with no one to talk to and nothing to worry about, felt like peace. The drive out there was long. As the sun dipped beneath the horizon and the landscape turned to a wash of dark reds and shadows, I realized how truly isolated the place was. The station sat about 30 miles away from the nearest town, a little speck on the map called Sanders. Just getting there felt like driving into a different world. No cell signal, no houses, no signs of life, just open desert and the endless ribbon of blacktops stretching out in either direction. The GPS on my phone had given up 10 minutes before I arrived. I only knew I was there when I saw the flickering fluorescent sign buzz to life out of the darkness. It was an old building, rectangular and squatting low against the earth like it was trying not to be noticed. One side had 2 gas pumps under a canopy that looked like it hadn't been painted in decades. Rust bled through the edges, and the light above flickered in a slow, almost deliberate rhythm. The windows were clouded with dust, and inside, the shelves were stocked with whatever could survive the desert heat and time. Chips, canned soup, soda that had probably been bottled when I was in high school. There was no one else around when I arrived. Just the soft whirring of the overhead lights and the low moan of the desert wind. It felt like the kind of place you stumbled across in a dream or a nightmare. And yet, I felt oddly calm. The silence was thick, but not oppressive. The air was dry, filled with the scent of sand and gasoline. The kind of air that settles deep into your lungs and reminds you that you're far away from the world you know. I was given a small set of instructions. The key was hidden under the mat, and there was a handwritten note taped to the register from the day manager named Carl. He wrote like he didn't expect me to read it. Just a few sentences about how to log fuel purchases, how to restock the cooler, and to not go out back after midnight. That last part felt like a joke, but the way it was written, no smiley face, no hint of humor, gave me pause. My shift started at 10 p.m. and lasted until 6 in the morning, 8 hours of silence, broken only by the occasional rumble of a passing truck, or the creak of the station's old ceiling fan. At first, I thought the stillness would bother me. I expected to feel restless, trapped. But the vastness outside. The glass windows had a strange way of making the building feel like a bubble, like nothing could touch me there. I felt removed from the world, untouchable. But that kind of isolation, it doesn't take long before it begins to change you. You start hearing things, feeling things, seeing shapes in the corners of your vision that disappear when you turn to look. You tell yourself it's just the mind playing tricks, but something about that stretch of desert. It holds on to things. Sounds echo longer. Shadows linger just a second too long. And the further you are from the nearest soul, the more you start to wonder if you're really alone. It was around my 4th night on the job when the feeling started. That strange sensation, like the air had changed somehow. Heavier, slower, charged with something I couldn't quite explain. The gas station had become familiar by then. Its layout, its creaks, the rhythmic hum of the refrigerators in the back, the constant low buzz of the overhead lights. But even in that familiarity, something began to feel off. Subtle at first. A faint flicker near the edge of my vision. A movement outside that vanished the moment I looked. It wasn't the kind of place where you expected visitors after midnight. Not unless they were truckers or lost tourists. But that night, it felt like someone, or something, was there, just beyond the edge of the light. At first, I thought it might have been headlights. You see a lot of weird light patterns in the desert. The flatness of the land, the heat rising off the ground. It can play tricks on your eyes. But this was different. There were no cars, no engine noise. Just that quick flash of something moving past the windows. I stood up behind the counter and stepped closer to the glass, scanning the lot. It was empty. The fuel pumps stood still. The canopy light buzzed softly above them, and the darkness beyond the edge of the concrete felt impossibly thick. I stared out into it for a while, squinting, trying to convince myself it was nothing. The second flicker came maybe an hour later. This time, I was in the storage room, sorting through a shipment of snacks that had somehow arrived despite the remote location. I turned to walk back into the main area, and through the small window in the stockroom door, I saw it again. Something passing across the front of the store. Just a shadow, but it moved too fast, like it didn't belong to anything solid. I rushed out, expecting to see someone walking by. Maybe some desert drifter or someone playing a prank. But the lot was empty again, the stillness undisturbed. My heart beat a little faster as I slowly walked around the counter, peering through, the glass on both sides. Nothing. The desert outside was silent and blank. I tried to laugh it off, told myself I was just tired, that the long shifts and the isolation were getting to me. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. There was a presence in the air, something that didn't make noise but made itself known all the same. I began to notice it more often. Quick glimpses of motion, always outside, always in that space between the pumps and the edge of the desert. Sometimes it looked tall, sometimes hunched. Sometimes it wasn't anything you could define, just a shifting of darkness against darkness. The lights in the station would flicker more frequently when it was near. That's how I began to time it. When the overhead lights began to buzz and dim for no reason, I'd glance out the window, and sure enough, something would move, never close, never clear, but always there, always watching. I would stand there, frozen, hoping whatever it was would stay outside, hoping the glass between us was enough. The gas station, as rundown as it was, started to feel like a cage, or worse, like a trap, like it was never meant to keep things out, but to keep something in. By the end of that shift, I had stopped walking near the windows. I kept the lights on, stayed behind the counter, and tried not to look outside unless I had to. I don't know if that made me feel safer or just more paranoid, but one thing became clear. The flickers weren't my imagination. Something was out there, and it knew I was in here. It was the fifth night when the noises began. By now, I had accepted the flickers and shadows as part of the job, part of the landscape. I'd even tried to rationalize them. Heat waves, desert animals, maybe some trick of the light, or a lingering hallucination from lack of sleep. But sounds. Sounds are different. You can't always explain them away, especially not when they come from somewhere they shouldn't. It started sometime after midnight. I was standing behind the counter, half watching an old movie playing on the tiny television mounted in the corner when I heard it. A faint scratching. Light, like fingernails grazing a metal surface. It came from the back wall near the stockroom. I muted the TV and listened, my body suddenly still, every sense on edge. The scratching came again, rhythmic, almost patient. I walked toward the back slowly, flashlight in hand, though the overhead lights were still on. I stood by the storage room door and listened. Nothing. Just silence. I opened the door and peeked inside. The room was as I had left it. Boxes stacked, neatly, shelves untouched. I walked around, checking the walls and the ceiling for anything out of place. No holes, no signs of rodents or damage. The sound didn't return while I was in there. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had just moved out of reach. Back at the counter, I tried to focus. The silence returned, but it wasn't comforting anymore. It felt thick, artificial, like it was waiting. That's when the wind began to change. The station had always groaned at night. A creak here, a rattle there. old wood, old metal, and desert wind made for a chorus of unsettling background noise. But this was different. The wind didn't howl, it whispered. Low, like a voice half hidden beneath layers of static. I went to the door, opened it, and stepped outside. The air was still, not a breeze. The desert stretched out in every direction, flat and lifeless. But I could still hear it. That whisper. I turned in circles, trying to find the source. But it felt like it was everywhere and nowhere all at once. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes before retreating inside, locking the door behind me, even though there was no one around. I didn't want to sit down again. Didn't want to relax. I stayed standing, pacing between the aisles, checking the windows, waiting for something. That's when I heard the tapping. This time on the glass, a single deliberate tap. Then another. Then silence. I spun around to face the front window, heart pounding. There was nothing there, just the reflection of the dim store lights on the glass and the empty lot beyond. I waited, my breath shallow, trying to see through the reflection. Another tap. From the opposite side this time. I rushed, over, pressing my face to the glass, trying to catch sight of whoever or whatever was doing it. Again, nothing. The wind had returned, just a little now, enough to rattle the sign hanging under the pump canopy. But the tapping wasn't the wind. It was too precise, too intentional. I went outside again, doing a full circle around the building, with my flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness but revealed nothing but sand and weeds. No footprints, no signs of life. Yet the moment I stepped back inside, I felt it again. That pressure, like the space around me had contracted. Like someone was standing too close, but I couldn't see them. My ears rang slightly, and the air felt colder, heavier. The scratching resumed minutes later, this time from under the floor. Then, silence, again. Not peaceful silence, but the kind that makes you feel like you're being listened to. Like your every breath is being measured by something just beyond your understanding. By the 6th night, the unease had rooted itself in my bones. The strange flickers, the sounds that came from nowhere, the weight of something unseen pressing in from all sides. It was all beginning to wear me down. I hadn't been sleeping well, and my thoughts were no longer my own. Every little noise made me jump. Every gust of wind felt like a whisper aimed directly at me. It was around 2:30 a.m. when I decided to check the surveillance system, more out of desperation than duty. The gas station had 4 cameras, one over the register, one facing the front door, one in the stockroom, and one aimed at the lot and fuel pumps outside. The monitor was old, grainy, and black and white. Most nights, it showed a whole lot of nothing. An empty lot, a quiet store, occasional static. But that night, when I rewound the footage to the earlier flickering moments, something caught my eye. A figure. Not a person exactly. Not from what I could see. It appeared for just a second near the pumps, tall, narrow, slightly hunched. The image blurred as it moved, almost like it disrupted the feed itself. I paused and zoomed in, but the more I looked at it, the less sense it made. It didn't have a defined shape. Not quite human, but not fully abstract either. As if it existed, in the space between things. I scanned the timeline, trying to see if it appeared again, and there it was. Another moment, about an hour earlier. This time, closer to the store. The thing was standing just beyond the reach of the light. A little to the right of the window, where I'd heard the tapping. I never saw it with my eyes. That night, only on the footage. My stomach turned. I rewound further. More static, more stillness. And then, another sighting, even earlier. This time, it looked like it was crouched low by the trash bin, completely motionless. It had been there, watching me, for hours. I sat frozen in front of the monitor. The grainy images burned into my mind. I tried to rationalize it. Dust, glare, a trick of the feed. But no explanation fit. The figure didn't just show up once. It appeared again and again, always just outside the range of direct visibility, always pointed toward the building. Toward me. The way it seemed to know where the cameras were, avoiding direct eye contact with them, staying in shadows, moving in ways that felt too calculated. It made my skin crawl. I switched to the live feed, staring at the screen with wide eyes, afraid I might see it there again. At first, the lot was empty. Just a pair of fuel pumps standing like sentinels in the dark. Then the static returned. Just for a second. A flicker. The image wavered, lines cutting across the screen. And then, movement. In the far left corner of the feed, near the edge of the lot. A distortion. Like something had walked past, brushing the corner of the lens, but leaving behind no clear form. I looked up from the screen, heart racing, and slowly turned my head toward the front window. Nothing. At least nothing I could see. But I could feel it. That feeling of being watched intensified, like a hand pressed against my back, invisible and cold. I started checking the live feed obsessively after that. Every few minutes. Scanning for flickers, distortions, anything that hinted it was still there. It became a game, a ritual. A desperate attempt to prove to myself I wasn't going insane, that something real was out there, that I wasn't just imagining the eyes I could feel from across the darkness. Eyes that never blinked, eyes that knew I had finally seen them. It was around 3:45 a.m. when the power went out. 1 second, I was watching the security feed, the grainy footage flickering between the cameras as I scanned for any sign of the thing I'd seen earlier. The next, everything went black. No warning, no flicker beforehand, just sudden, suffocating darkness. The hum of the refrigerator units died instantly, followed by the silence of the overhead lights, and even the soft whir of the surveillance monitor fell silent, the kind of silence that made your ears ring. The desert night outside was already pitch black, but with the store's lights out too, the darkness became total. I could barely see my own hand in front of my face. I reached under the counter for the flashlight I kept there and fumbled with the switch, my hands slick with sudden sweat. When it finally clicked on, the weak yellow beam cut through the darkness, like a knife through fog, revealing only what was directly in front of me. Everything else remained swallowed by shadow. My first thought was to check the circuit breaker in the back, but as I moved through the store, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The front door, which I was certain had been locked earlier, was slightly ajar. Just a crack, no breeze, no sound of it creaking open. Just a perfectly still gap, as if someone had opened it slowly, deliberately, and then stopped halfway. I stared at it, frozen, flashlight trembling in my grip, the silence now replaced by the deafening sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. I approached the door slowly, shining the flashlight out into the lot. The beam swept across the pumps, the cracked pavement, the empty trash bins. Nothing, but something felt wrong. The air had changed again, thicker, colder, like something had bled into it. I stepped back inside, shut the door, and turned the deadbolt with shaking hands. That's when I noticed the footprints. At first, I thought maybe I had tracked in dirt or sand earlier, but as I moved the flashlight across the floor, the truth hit me like a wave. The prints were too large, spaced too far apart, and they weren't made by shoes. They looked more like bare feet, but elongated, misshapen. Each print smeared slightly, as if whatever had made them didn't walk so much as drag itself forward, half sliding with each step. The trail started near the door and led toward the middle of the store, curving behind the shelves and disappearing into the narrow hallway near the storage room. I couldn't breathe. My mind screamed at me to leave, to run out into the desert, to get as far away from that place as possible. But my legs didn't move. I stood there listening. That's when I heard it again, scratching. Not on the walls this time, not on the floor, but on the ceiling tiles above the storage room. Slow, deliberate, as if it knew I could hear it. The flashlight flickered in my hand, and I banged it against my palm, praying it would stay on. I backed away slowly, eyes locked on the hallway, waiting for something to emerge from the shadows. The power didn't come back. The flashlight was the only thing keeping the darkness from swallowing the room completely. The trail of footprints seemed fresher now, somehow darker than before, as if the thing had just passed through moments earlier. I scanned the aisles, the counters, the corners of the ceiling, every inch of the store. But there was nothing. Just that lingering sense of being watched, of something unseen waiting just beyond the edge of the light, waiting for me to make a move. I stood frozen in place, gripping the weak flashlight like it was the only thing keeping me tethered to sanity. The silence was complete again, but it wasn't empty. It was loaded. I could feel the weight of something in the air, like a storm that refused to break, hovering just above me. Every instinct screamed at me to move, to hide, to do anything except stand still in that aisle with the flickering beam of light, casting long, trembling shadows on the floor. But something else held me there. A pressure, like invisible hands, on my shoulders, keeping me in place. The trail of those inhuman footprints led around the corner, toward the hallway, and eventually back into the darkness of the storage room. I knew that if I followed them, I'd be walking into whatever had made them. I couldn't even bring myself to say it aloud, not even in my thoughts. I had already seen too much to pretend it was just a prank or an animal, or a trick of exhaustion. This thing had intelligence. Patience. It had been circling me for nights, always just out of reach, watching, waiting, learning the rhythm of my movements. It wasn't acting on impulse. It had a purpose. I thought about calling for help, but my phone had no signal. It rarely did in the middle of the desert. But in that moment, the lack of connection felt personal. I tried the landline behind the counter, but the line was dead. Just a flat, lifeless hum on the other end. Even the emergency radio tucked in. The drawer refused to power on, as if whatever had killed the power had seeped into everything electrical, choking out every lifeline I might have had. I took a deep breath and moved, slowly, carefully, keeping my back to the wall as I followed the edge of the store toward the hallway. The beam of the flashlight wavered, struggling against the darkness. The prints on the floor were more visible now, deep, wet impressions in the dust and grime, too deliberate to be accidental. The hallway stretched ahead like a tunnel, the storage room door hanging open just a crack. The scratching sound had stopped, but that made it worse. It meant the thing had moved, repositioned, perhaps waiting for me to step into its path. I reached the hallway and paused, the smell hitting me all at once, like copper and rot, a dense metallic scent that filled my nose and made my stomach twist. I'd never smelled anything like it before. Not exactly blood, not exactly decay, but something unnatural. My skin began to prickle, the hairs on my arms standing up one by one. I aimed the flashlight down the hallway, and its beam landed squarely on the storage room door. The footprints led directly to it, vanishing into the shadows beyond. There was a sound behind me, a shuffle, quick, sharp, but low. I spun around and scanned the store, light bouncing off every surface. No movement, no sign of anything. But I could feel it getting closer, the sense of presence, of breath just behind my neck. I didn't know whether to run, to hide, or to barricade myself in that cursed little office in the back. Every option felt futile. The thing wasn't trying to break in. It already had. It had walked among the aisles. It had been near me more times than I wanted to consider. And now it was ready to stop hiding. The lights remained out. The quiet, absolute. I could still hear my heart beating in my ears, rapid and uneven. I stood with my back pressed against the wall, scanning the darkness with a dying flashlight, knowing that something was in there with me, sharing the same air, watching from just beyond the narrow cone of light, watching and waiting for the right moment to make itself known.